Well, good evening, everybody. Lovely to have you all on board this evening. And a very big welcome to my now and recently bearded friend, Nick Garbutt. Hello, Nick.
Good evening, everyone. Evening, Chris.
So, Nick, this evening we're going to chat about the Falklands and South Georgia. Just thought I'd remind you.
Oh, and I thought it was South Luangwa this evening. There we are.
No, we're chatting about South Georgia and Falklands. I'm lucky enough to have just returned myself from the Falklands and South Georgia, and indeed Antarctica, having got back yesterday, in fact. And to be perfectly honest, still feeling rather jet lagged, which is a bit peculiar since Buenos Aires is only 3 hours time difference. But anyway, I do feel jet lagged. So for all of you who are on this evening, please do feel free to pose questions to myself and to Nick, which you can do either via the Q&A or via the chat. And as at least one person has pointed out this evening, I'm not Phil North. I'm actually Chris Breen. I'm not quite sure why my system is telling everybody that I'm Phil North, but anyway, I'm not. I'm Chris. So look, what we'll do, we'll start as all these things should. We'll start with a quick map of well, perhaps we won't actually. Hang on a second. I'm now suffering from the Nick Garbutt what do we
curse.
Right, there we are. The Nick Garbutt curse. Yes, exactly. Anyway, no, that seems to have resolved itself, thankfully, quicker than it normally does when you have it yourself, Nick. Okay, so the Falklands and South Georgia, both absolutely incredible wildlife destinations, and destinations which we are featuring in a festival of wildlife which we are running in 2025. So we'll talk about the Falklands and South Georgia, and then we'll talk about the festival specifically right sort of towards the end of the presentation. In order to get to the Falklands, well, there are a number of different ways you can do it, but perhaps the easiest way to do it is to fly either directly from South America, from Punta Arenas, or from Santiago. For our Festival of Wildlife, we're aiming to fly from Santiago directly into the Falkland Islands. And once we get to the Falkland Islands, we will be boarding a rather lovely vessel called the Magellan Explorer. There are, of course, other vessels that do this trip. And we will, having done that, oh, there's the curse again. Oh, goodness. Having done that, so we fly into a place called Mount Pleasant, which is slightly to the west of Stanley. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. I think you probably can't. Can you see my cursor, Nick, if I do this? You can't see it.
Can actually, yes.
Can you? Okay. So flying to Stanley, and Mount Pleasant Airport is here. Which is about a 45-minute drive to the west of Stanley on East Falkland. Once we reach Mount Pleasant, we will then drive across to Stanley, and we will board our vessel there, which would be normal practice. There are some voyages to the Falklands and South Georgia that actually begin in Ushuaia, in Argentina, the southern tip of South America, and they will go they will actually go by ship from Ushuaia out to the Falklands. In the case of our festival in 2025, we're going to fly into Mount Pleasant. We will then travel over to Stanley, and we will then have an opportunity to explore for a couple of days the Falkland Islands. Most likely, we will first of all head out to this island here, West Point Island. We'll sail around the northern side of the Falklands archipelago, and we will also have an opportunity to spend a couple of hours in Stanley as well. But I'll just show you a couple of photographs of the Falklands. This is West Point Island, which is a rather lovely island, and some of the beautiful things that you can see on West Point Island. These rather colourful meadowlarks, photographed on these beautiful yellow flowers, which is always rather nice. We should have an opportunity here to see striated caracaras, one of two different species of caracara that we can see here in the Falklands. And we will also have an opportunity to walk across to the northern side of West Point Island and go to a rather fabulous albatross colony called Devil's Nose. Now, I can't remember, Nick, have you been to Devil's Nose? On West
I
Point?
haven't.
Have you?
I have not been to that particular colony. I've been to a similar colony on Saunders.
Yep.
Obviously, there are numerous black-browed albatross colonies around the Falkland Islands of varying sizes, but they're all utterly spectacular, just a thronging mass of bird life, and obviously from a photographic point of view, present all sorts of opportunities for some just terrific image creation. I think one of the recurring themes whenever you visit any sites in the Falklands or South Georgia or Antarctica, but particularly Falklands and South Georgia, is that it's initially overwhelming if you've never experienced it before, because there are just so many individuals of whatever species we're talking about. Here, obviously, it's the albatross. And photographically, that can, it's amazing, but it also is very confusing, and you can end up sort of having a bit of headless chicken syndrome because you're just looking all over the place and not really focusing, both literally and metaphorically, on what you should be doing. So my recommendation to anyone that's going for the first time is, however difficult this may seem, is initially just sit and watch it and absorb it, get a feel for it before you start putting your camera to your eye. And I can guarantee that no one will do that, of course, and myself included, but it does pay to just sit and look and absorb it before you then start to think, how best can I start creating images that I'm going to be pleased with, whether it be of individual birds or of groups of birds in context with their habitat and so forth. And I think one of the other recurring themes is just the proximity that you have to these thronging colonies, masses of birds, whether they be albatross or penguins, whatever. You're just surrounded by them, and that makes it sensational and memorable, but also, as I say, can be overwhelming when you're trying to piece together a photograph and imagine something that's framed by a little rectangle. So again, one of the sort of recurring themes is that you won't just get one chance to do this, you'll get repeated opportunities to do this, whether it be at one site or another. Yes. So even if you don't get it right first time, you can build on that experience and improve on what you do when you come back to the subsequent colony, wherever that may be.
That's absolutely right. It is utterly overwhelming. Even, as you say, having been fortunate enough to go to these places more than once, every time it's the sheer volume of wildlife that makes it overwhelming, and the sounds and everything that goes with it.
Of course, the conditions are obviously different every time, so the opportunities are different every time. Even if you're going to the same place on numerous occasions, the opportunities each time you go are different.
Yeah, and somehow or other, I think we all feel excuse me, I think we all feel a sort of almost an unnecessary sense of urgency to photograph things, when in actual fact what you really want to do is you really need to stop, pause, take a breath, as you say, just kind of look and see what's around you.
So it's so easy to just press a shutter and go back to the ship with 3,000 pictures and look at them and go, oh, I didn't really quite got it. And obviously in this day and age where taking images is so easy and you can rattle up large numbers of images very quickly with the rates that cameras fire at these days, it's all too easy to fill memory cards and then think, oh, what was I doing there? Yes,
absolutely. Well, it's worth mentioning that at the black-browed albatross colony that we were just looking at Devil's Nose, there is also a significant number of rockhopper penguins. We're going on our Festival of Wildlife trip. We are departing the UK in middle October, and the rockhoppers will definitely have started nesting then. It could be that there will be hundreds and hundreds of rockhoppers. It could be that there'll just be a few. It could be that there'll be thousands. I don't know, but there's a very good chance that we'll see rockhoppers. In fact, it would be very unusual not to be seeing rockhoppers there. So that's another thing just to consider at that one single colony. Also around the Falklands, of course, there's a good chance of seeing dolphins. These are Commerson's dolphins, but there's a chance of seeing Commerson's and Peel's dolphins. And these were all these shots, most recent shots were taken on my trip that I got back from yesterday. And I mentioned that we will also have an opportunity to spend a little bit of time in Stanley. Stanley is a very interesting, not sure if it's actually technically referred to as a city or a town, but anyway, it's an interesting place. It's a very colourful place. It's a slightly unusual place. It is most definitely a slice of England, or at least a slice of UK in the South Atlantic. Just point out a couple of things here with this rather lovely cathedral, and in front of the cathedral, this extraordinary whalebone arch, which is constructed out of the jaws of blue whales, obviously from the dim and distant past. But it's a beautiful place, and if the weather's good, it's an interesting place to visit. This is the memorial to those that lost their lives in the conflict in 1982, now 40 years ago. But it's an interesting place to visit. I have to say there are one or two nice pubs, and they brew a very nice beer. And there may be an opportunity to get out to a place called Gypsy Cove, which is 3 or 4 miles slightly outside of Stanley. Gypsy Cove, there's all sorts of interesting things that are possibilities to see, including peregrine falcon. A couple of people on our recent trip who are photographing various things, I think, including turkey vultures, and which caracara is this? Crested caracara, of course, which was nesting there, and also in the area nearby, things like South American sea lion. And you feel free to count the number of penguin species that we are likely to see during the course of the trip, but this would be species number 2, Magellanic penguin, which we stand a good chance of seeing here at Gypsy Cove. Nick, I think this is one of your shots from a while ago, though in actual fact I suspect probably not from Gypsy Cove in this case. Not from
Gypsy Cove, over towards Saunders, I think.
Saunders, yeah.
Bit hazy where I took that, but yeah, that was 12, 13 years ago I took that picture. So, yeah.
So other things that we might see in the Falklands, which is one of the really sort of quite exciting reasons to be going to the Falklands. There are some other lovely birds and things to see, like Falklands steamer duck and upland goose. These are photographs of Mark Cording's. Kelp goose is another thing that we might see in the Falklands, and dolphin gull, which I have to say I think is perhaps one of the most beautiful gulls of all, if not the most beautiful. And Falklands thrush, which is I think a subspecies, is it a subspecies? I'm not quite sure, of austral thrush. There's also house wren, but there's also an endemic wren in the Falklands as well. And there's also black oyster catcher. So these are all interesting birds that we may well see when we're in the Falkland Islands, and all very well worth seeing, and will make the Falklands a particularly interesting and wonderful start to any trip that subsequently then goes across to South Georgia. So after only a couple of nights in in the Falkland Islands, it's just the briefest of visits. What we then do is we will head east and slightly south to South Georgia, and we will have a couple of days at sea. It's about 2 to 2.5 days, just depending on the sea conditions, in order to get to South Georgia. And of course, Nick, as you and I know, it's by no means wasted time, right? So time
Absolutely.
is wonderful, and
I
it's
think,
a real opportunity to look at birds and start to hone the bird watching skills and bird photography skills.
Absolutely. I think if you've never been before, it would be easy to look at an itinerary and almost dismiss those 2 days and think, oh, well, I'll just read a book and put my feet up and wait until we get to South Georgia. And how wrong you would be to think that, because particularly the first half to 2/3 of the journey, the numbers of birds that follow the ship and give you ample opportunity to take and practice taking pictures of birds in flight are many, from the smaller ones. Is this, I can't remember, is this a shearwater?
Cape Petrel.
Cape Petrel.
Cape Petrel. The previous one was Southern Giant Petrel, as is this next one.
Yes, that's Giant Petrel, of course. And then there are 2 or 3, 4 different species of albatross. The black-browed again. There's sooties,
and
grey-headed, and as you approach and get closer to the South Georgia, you get royal and wandering, of course, all of which come close and to the ship bow ride, and you can spend hours, if the weather's good, out in the bow of the ship or the stern of the ship, photographing, particularly the bow of the ship, where they just come and ride the bulge of air that's being pushed in front of the ship, and it's fantastic photography. So you can easily rack up, hundreds of images and see more than a dozen species of oceanic bird by spending several hours out there. And there's a chance of seeing whales and dolphins, of course, as well, throughout the voyage. So don't for one moment think that that's sort of non-wildlife time, non-photography time. It's very much part and parcel of the trip and should be viewed as an integral part of the wildlife component of the trip.
It is. The wildlife viewing is great, and I think on our festival trip, Nick, you and Mark would anticipate doing some photography workshops and so on.
Oh, without a doubt. We would be spending many an hour out on deck photographing stuff, and obviously whoever else is out on deck with us will be doing all we can to help them and give them ideas, improve their imagery, etc., as best we can. But it's always just great fun being out there, and just bracing, of course, and it's all part and parcel of that wonderful wilderness on the edge of the world experience. But you can just have great fun taking lots of pictures, practicing different things. And I think one of the things that's so nice about it is that you get repeated opportunities. If you see something, it's a wandering albatross, whatever it may be, it's going to come back, or different individuals will come back. So you're not just getting one bite at the cherry, you'll get numerous bites at the cherry to do different sorts of things.
Yeah, I think you're right. And as we as we approach South Georgia, there's one sort of set of rocks that we see. These are rocks called shag rocks. There's a huge number, tens of thousands, I think, of South Georgia shag which nest at shag rocks. And they're the only visible rocks between the Falklands and South Georgia, which is quite interesting. And who knows, we may well see whales in and around this area. There's a good opportunity on the trip that we were on most recently. We had humpbacks in and around this area as well, which was nice. And then again, as we get closer still to South Georgia, there is also the possibility of icebergs, but who knows? As you say, every trip is different. Then we get to South Georgia itself. Apologies, this isn't the world's greatest map, but it does the job, at least for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you round South Georgia. I'm going to begin here in King Haakon Bay, because this is often the first place that a trip to South Georgia will land. So we're going to start in King Haakon Bay. Whoops. We're going to start in, I can't go backwards. Yes, I can. We're going to start in King Haakon Bay, and then we're going to go up and around. We are going to go into this area here. We are then going to go to Salisbury Plain and Pryon Island. We're going to go down the coast all the way down this way, just looking at a few images of each of the different places that we are likely to stop or Zodiac cruise along the way. It's an expedition, and we simply can't guarantee what we're going to see nor where we will see it, which is one of the reasons why it's good to have lots of landfall opportunities and lots of Zodiac cruising opportunities. And on our trip, which we're doing in October 25 to the Falklands and South Georgia specifically, we've got an extended period of time in South Georgia itself. 7 nights we will have in the South Georgia area, and there will be, subject to the weather conditions, at least 2 activities a day, and we're aiming that they will be extended activities in terms of the amount of time we'll be able to spend on shore, etc. South Georgia is home to a staggering array of wildlife. It must be the finest wildlife location on earth. I'm sure you'd agree, Nick, but something like 2 million fur seals, about 400,000 elephant seals, 70 species of birds. There's millions of king penguins, hundreds of thousands of gentoos. There's also all sorts of whales that you can see offshore, from fin whales to blue whales, humpbacks, and all sorts of other wonderful things that you might see. So King Haakon Bay, quite likely to be the first place that we land. It's springtime at this time of year here, and very good chance that we will see elephant seal, a female elephant seal. We may well see an elephant seal with a pup. We may well see multiple elephant seals with pups, and we will certainly also see male elephant seals, and we'll see them sparring. We'll see them doing battle basically for the females. I think you've had quite a bit of experience of this, Nick, haven't you? Not sparring for females yourself, but photographing elephant seals sparring for females.
Well, that's another story, but indeed, at many of the sites, the beach sites, from around mid-October onwards, but only until mid-late November, is the prime time to see elephant seals, and particularly the male elephant seals that come ashore for that period to set up their territories, battle for territories, and therefore get access to females. So in that regard, not coincidentally, of course, the timing of the festival is perfect. It's not something you will always see on a South Georgia trip. If you were to go outside that period, you wouldn't see it. I remember on my very first trip to South Georgia, which was in January, I was very disappointed because I saw 2 female elephant seals and that was it. But going in middle end of October, we will see hundreds and hundreds because they're all ashore battling and getting ready to breed. And it's one of the most spectacular things. Until you see a male southern elephant seal, it's difficult to comprehend how big they are. You're talking about an animal that's the best part of 5 or 6 meters long and several tons in weight. And when they rear up to battle, they're 6, 7, 8 feet high. And it's just staggering that you can be standing on a beach and in close proximity to these huge hulks as they do battle. As you can see from this shot, there's a bunch of females all hauled out, but somewhere within that proximity there will be males that are battling for access to each of these females when they come into estrus.
There was an absolutely brilliant description, I thought, of elephant seals in an article, and I'm afraid I would love to be able to reference the journalist who wrote the article because it was just so brilliant, but I'm afraid I can't remember who it was. But shortly before we went away, and whoever the journalist was described elephant seals as large and poorly, what was it? I think it was oversized and poorly upholstered sofas. Which I thought was brilliant because the skin's always flaky and they're always looking, they're never really looking in their prime, are they, in terms of skin, even when they are in their prime. So
no, particularly the males, of course, once they start battling, they get battle scarred and bashed up, ripped up, and I think the females are often shedding various bits of skin as well. They're molting when they come ashore. So, as you say, they look like bad bits of upholstery.
Yeah. So look, we've landed at King Haakon Bay on this occasion. And that's what we've seen. This is actual fact, and it was when you and I were there together in 2018, I think it was.
2018, yes.
I'm now going to go round to the northern side of the island and go to a place called Right Whale Bay. But I just want to give an illustration of the ship I was on most recently, which is Ocean Adventurer. But really just to sort of describe a little bit more about expedition cruising. So it's all very well having the opportunity to go ashore, which is really a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, as we know. But we can also have wonderful wildlife viewing from the decks of the ship. We will also have wonderful wildlife viewing from the Zodiacs. And sometimes, instead of actually landing on a beach, we will do a Zodiac cruise. And in this particular, on this particular trip that I've just done, we went to a magnificent place called Right Whale Bay. The conditions weren't appropriate for us to land on this occasion. Sea conditions weren't appropriate for us to land, so we Zodiac cruised. The weather was beautiful. It gave us an opportunity on this occasion to see king penguins, because there's a huge number of king penguins at Right Whale Bay. And you'll note, I think that's our third species of penguin that we've had. We had Magellanic penguin. We had, I can't remember which ones we had. Have we had gentoos? No, I can't remember. Don't think we've had gentoos yet. Anyway, whatever. I'm pretty sure that's our third species of penguin.
Rockhopper.
Rockhoppers, that's right. Rockhoppers, Magellanic and kings. But this was, so these photographs are taken from the Zodiac. As I say, the conditions weren't quite right for us to be able to land, but in terms of photographic opportunities and a wildlife experience, it was exceptional. It was one of the most wonderful, actually, activities that we had on this most recent trip that I did. for any number of reasons, but of course, partly the sheer number of penguins that we saw, and the weather and the atmosphere and so on and so forth. However, as I say, it's just worth mentioning that specific point about Zodiac cruising. As you move down the coast, the next place from Right Whale Bay, the next key place, is Salisbury Plain. Salisbury Plain is one of the most incredible locations on South Georgia. There's no question about it. Scenically, it's beautiful. And in terms of wildlife, it is breathtaking. Snowy sheathbill, as anyone will be able to see here, this was actually taken on the ship, as opposed to actually at it was taken at Salisbury Plain, but on the ship. But once on land, wonderful Antarctic fur seals, which we had, and should always have wonderful opportunities to see these guys here at this time of year, and king penguins. There are something like 150,000 breeding pairs of king penguins at Salisbury Plain, which, if they each have a chick, as they do, and other non-breeding king penguins as well, makes the likely number of penguins here, king penguins here, anywhere between 500,000 and 750,000 penguins, which is pretty amazing and is somewhat breathtaking and, as we mentioned before, slightly overwhelming. And we'll see them here in all different stages of life, from fluffy chicks to fully grown adults, to those going through molts, as this one is.
I think one of the things that's always interesting going to the really big colonies of king penguins like Salisbury Plain is that they're not evenly spaced either. So there are areas along the beach with relatively few, and then large, densely packed concentrations where it's almost inconceivable how many number of birds are crammed into a particular area, for whatever reason that is, that they've chosen that area. And obviously from a photographic point of view, that then gives you all sorts of scope and ideas for just depicting that enormous mass of life and the color and the spectacle and everything else, which is, it's just a sensational thing to witness and obviously have a chance to photograph.
It's wonderful, isn't it? So we're going to move on from Salisbury Plain for a minute, and I'm just going to mention very briefly Pryon Island. Pryon Island is where the wandering albatrosses breed, and there should be an opportunity to stop at Pryon Island on our trip in October. We would be there in principle before the albatrosses are starting to breed. So we should have an opportunity to land there, weather conditions being what they are. That will obviously be another rather positive string to the bow of traveling at this time of year when we're going on the festival trip. Moving further down the coast, Fortuna Bay and Stromness Harbour. Stromness Harbour is where Shackleton arrived on his at the end of his rather strenuous would be the wrong word, but rather extraordinary trek. And if we're able to go into Fortuna Bay, which is that's where this photograph was taken, we may have an opportunity to actually do the final part of the trek that Shackleton did between Fortuna Bay and Stromness Harbour, which would be wonderful if we could, as indeed we did on the trip that I've just done. We were particularly lucky in terms of weather, as you can see here. Stromness Harbour, which we hope to have an opportunity to land at, is where Shackleton and the three others that he rowed width from Elephant Island across the Scotia Sea. This is where they arrived. It's derelict, of course, and in actual fact, you can't get all that much closer to the old whaling station than where this photograph was taken. But they are working on the evolution of the manager's house at Stromness as an historical site to enable us in future to be able to look around it and to see what it was like at the time when Shackleton arrived. It's another wonderful site in South Georgia with yet more wonderful photographic opportunities. It was, of course, an old whaling station, and a lot of the old whalers are buried here. It's a memorial to what happened in the past. And the other sort of excuse me, the other major memorial memorial perhaps is not quite the right word, but is Grytviken, which was another massive whaling station. And Grytviken, there is a shop, there is a museum. They have a replica of the James Caird, which was the boat which the rowing boat which Shackleton and his three compatriots rowed from Elephant Island. And it's another fascinating place, another place that I would think every trip to South Georgia makes. And the very first thing you do when you get to South Georgia, and when you get to Grytviken, I beg your pardon, is to go and see the grave of Sir Ernest Shackleton, and that of Frank Wild, who was his right-hand man, and that's the plaque to Frank Wild there. And always there'll be a toast to Ernest Shackleton. I know that a number of you who are listening in this evening have been there and done it and seen it. It's another location which is very photogenic. There is a research station here. There, of course, is the legacy from the past. Some of the old whaling, a couple of the old whaling vessels, the Petrel here, which is an interesting thing to see. There's an interesting church, which was built in 1914. Depending on what the weather's like, there may well be penguins around. Of course, there'll be elephant seals. There may well be nesting terns. Certainly when we were there recently, there were nesting terns, Antarctic terns. And of course, a grisly reminder perhaps of what was held in these gigantic tanks, which was whale oil. St. Andrews Bay is further down. And Nick, I think, well, we were together when we went to St. Andrews Bay in 2018.
We were.
If you want to say anything about St. Andrews Bay.
As you've alluded to, Chris, I think every site you have the opportunity to land at on South Georgia is spectacular in its own way. That said, there are three sites that I would set apart as being over and above all others. You've already mentioned Salisbury Plain. I would without question put St. Andrews Bay right up there, and the third one would be Gold Harbour. St. Andrews Bay is just the most stunning expanse, with, I think, the largest of all of the king penguin colonies, plus generally amazing aggregations of elephant seals in that October-November period, and stacks of other species as well. I think that's actually a picture of me, I think, lurking in the right-hand corner there.
Well, that's
I think it might be. Sorry about that, I spoiled the picture. But as you can see from that great expanse, it's just the most sensational area, and the ability to wander through all of that, pick your place, enjoy the spectacle and work out how to make the most of it photographically is not only hugely thrilling and enjoying, it's also challenging as well. And you know, these are all places that set your brain whirring away, in certainly photographically, and how to make the most of them. But St Andrews Bay would certainly be right up at the very top of all of the sites I visited, as right up there with the very best, if not the best, of all of the sites. It's not always a site you can land at, of course, because all of these sites are very much weather and sea conditions dependent, but it's generally one that those running an expedition would place very highly on their priority list, and obviously do their utmost to make sure that you get an opportunity to visit and to land.
Oh, sorry, I was muted, I beg your pardon. It's St Andrews Bay, Gold Harbour, like you say, and Salisbury Plain are really, they are three of the best. I couldn't agree more. We're on at Gold Harbour here now for this particular sort of sequence of images. And again, of course, not only king penguins, but wonderful Gentoo colonies as well here. You know, big colonies of Gentoo penguins. Again, you know, sort of tens of thousands strong. And again, I'll just sort of return to that thing that I mentioned about Zodiac cruising earlier. You know, it's not just about getting off, although that is, you know, clearly one of the most wonderful things of all. But cruising in the Zodiacs is phenomenal. It's exciting. You know, the weather plays a key part in all of this, and it's and if we can't get off, and if we are Zodiac cruising, doesn't mean to say it's not a good excursion. You know, it can be brilliant. Cooper Bay, right down in the southern part of South Georgia, is also really amazing. Again, some fantastic Gentoo colony, but also down at Cooper Bay, macaroni penguins. So macaronis, this will be the only opportunity on the trip to see macaronis. And the opportunities again here are actually likely to be Zodiac cruising rather than landings. And also, in actual fact, here at Cooper Bay, there's also a good opportunity, because there is a big colony of them, of seeing chinstrap penguins. When I was there a couple of weeks ago, we were able to see the chinstraps, but we couldn't get terribly close again because of the sea conditions. Also, as ever, throughout South Georgia, fabulous numbers of elephant seals. And in this particular case, I had a good opportunity to see South Georgia pipit, which is one of South Georgia's endemics, but they're in large numbers now on South Georgia, because they've managed to eradicate all of the rats from South Georgia. So that's a real big positive. So sort of coming towards the end of our presentation about South Georgia, I thought I'd throw in a couple of other images. Drygalski Fjord down in the very sort of southernmost tip of the island. That's really a scenic destination, but of course there is the opportunity to see whales and stuff throughout the whole of the island, possibly orcas, possibly blue whales or sei whales, humpbacks, of course, in all sorts of places, all around the islands. Very good opportunities to see leopard seals, though I have to say on this particular occasion, on the trip that I've just done, I didn't see leopard seal, which is a shame, but good opportunities to see leopard seal at the time of year that we're going. And then I thought I would just show you a few shots of the vessel that we're using. This is the vessel that we're using for our Festival of Wildlife in October 2025. It's one of the newest, certainly one of the most modern of the vessels that is now in use in the South Atlantic. We spent a lot of time researching the vessel quite specifically for our Festival of Wildlife trip. And we wanted a ship that accommodated 100 people or fewer, because the Antarctic Treaty doesn't permit more than 100 people to be disgorged onto the ice at any one time. This particular vessel, Magellan Explorer, accommodates 96 passengers. That's including the Wildlife Worldwide team. There are 60 crew, there are 12 expedition guides, and there are 10 Zodiacs. So there will be plenty of space to comfortably do Zodiac cruising and shore landings. It's, I have to say, one of the snazziest vessels there is. This is the lounge area. It's a beautifully appointed ship. It has lots of how would we refer to it? Presentation space, I guess. It has a lovely dining area. It has huge windows, floor to ceiling windows. And I think it's of particular note, I've put this image in quite deliberately, it's of particular note for those of you that have been on polar voyages in the past, that the Zodiac deck is almost at sea level. So it makes it terribly easy to get on and off the ship. Just a couple of shots of the cabins. This is one of what they call the porthole cabin. This is a veranda cabin, again, floor to ceiling windows, which is really lovely. And this is one of their deluxe veranda cabins with lovely sliding doors and what have you. There is also a penthouse suite, can you believe, should you wish to have one. But it really is a most beautiful.
Where you stay, Chris, isn't it?
I beg your pardon?
Isn't that where you stay?
Oh, always. Yes, always try and stay in the penthouse suite. Yes, absolutely. I wish. And then, so we've been to the Falklands now, we've been to South Georgia, we've had a little bit of a look at the ship. And I thought I'd just give you a quick idea of what it's like on a Festival of Wildlife day, making reference now quite specifically to our Festival of Wildlife trip in October 2025. So in addition to the photographic stuff, of which there will be quite a bit, because it is one of the most fabulous photographic locations anyone could possibly visit, Jonathan Truss will be on board as our resident wildlife artist, doing demonstrations and also workshops. We'll have Nick Mackman, that many of you will know, who will be doing sculpting workshops and demonstrations. Mark Coordine will be on board as one of our photographers, together with Nick. And together with Nick, Mark and others will be doing talks and presentations during the course of our festival. So there'll be it'll be a wonderful learning opportunity for people on the voyage too. We'll have lots of laughs and it'll be good fun. This is Joe Cornish, in actual fact, on this particular in this particular corner here, doing a photography presentation. And as is always the case on our Festivals of Wildlife, we have an auction to raise money for one of the local charities. In this particular case, we'll probably be raising money for the South Georgia Heritage Trust, or perhaps South Georgia Heritage Trust and an other. If you want to extend your stay from just the Falklands and South Georgia, you may wish to do an extension into Torres del Paine National Park. We've got one or two other extension ideas, but this is the obvious one. And Nick, we've got a few of your, two or three of your rather outstanding images, I have to say.
Thank you.
This being one of them.
I suppose what I would just add to what you said, Chris, for the benefit of those who don't know of the festival or the festival concept is that, unlike doing, shall we say, any other voyage-based trip to South Georgia Falklands, is all of the festivals, wherever they may be, they're about creating an atmosphere that allows you to just utterly immerse yourself in that particular area, its wildlife and the conservation issues, all encompassing. And the whole idea that there isn't a spare minute in the day, unless you want there to be a spare minute in the day, where you can't be engaged in something, some aspect to do with wildlife, whether you're actually seeing it or you're doing some peripheral activity associated with it. So it's just an all-encompassing experience, and as such, these trips are set apart from any other regular trip, and I think that's what makes them so special. I know, having been involved in several, I just love doing them because they just engender an atmosphere and a spirit that is absent from any other trip, and they're fabulous because of that. And also because you're obviously seeing wildlife in a particularly iconic location. So as Chris mentioned, there will be a number of optional add-ons to the festival. The most obvious one perhaps being visiting Torres del Paine, which is just about 3.5-4 hours drive north of Punta Arenas at the southern tip of Chile, very close to the Argentine border, the very southern tip of the Andes. It's a spectacular place to visit purely for the scenery alone. And the vast majority of people that go to Torres go for the scenery and to trek and walk off into the wilderness and do one or two very famous treks and mountain routes and climbs. However, from a wildlife perspective, it's most famous because it's quite simply the best place on the planet to see pumas in the wild. And if any of you have seen presentations I've done about big cat viewing around the world, I actually regard puma viewing in Torres del Paine as the best big cat experience there is on the planet. Not only because pumas themselves are stunningly beautiful, and seeing them in the context of Torres del Paine, which is breathtaking, is fabulous, but it's very much about the way you see the animals, the way you engage with them. Anyone that's been on an African safari or a tiger safari in India will know, however good that is, you are encapsulated in a vehicle, and you're constrained by a vehicle, and how you see the particular species that you're looking at is very much dictated by how the vehicle is able to interact with and move around whatever it is you're watching. That's not the case when you're in Torres del Paine, because you do it all on foot. It's quite the most remarkable thing to be able to wander over hillsides that are somewhat reminiscent of a moorland here in the UK, and encounter these cats, sit down on the hillside and have one walk by you handfuls of meters away, often even closer if you're lucky, because numerous individuals are so tolerant now of people, and it's just the most engaging experience to be able to spend time out on a hillside, watching, whether it be males, females, often females with cubs, that are so utterly tolerant of you being there that you could just spend hours in and amongst them. And it's, well, I'll wax lyrical, it's fantastic. There's plenty of other wildlife to see as well. Andean condors are very much to the fore, and should without doubt see condors in flight and maybe gathered on a kill. These are Darwin's rheas, and Andean grey fox as well, another species you're very much likely to encounter. And of course, the puma's main food items, species guanacos, which are a sort of wild version of a llama, the camel family, and they're the main prey species in Torres. So visiting Torres at the end of the festival or after the main part of the festival would mean visiting at the end of October, early November, which is effectively spring. So there may still be chance of flurries of snow, but most of the time there wouldn't be snow on the ground. Conditions rather similar to you see here. Spectacular cloud formations, often wonderful lenticular clouds form over the spectacular peaks. And over the course of a trip, however many days, and I'm not sure off the top of my head how long the extension is due to be, but my hunch is you would have 3, 4, 5 days of puma trekking within that period. You are likely to see several, if not numerous, different cats, and may even be lucky enough to watch them attempt hunts and so forth. So you can see all of this at very close quarters. You work with a very experienced puma tracker who will tell you where you can go, where you can sit, how far you go, where you have to be. And you just let all this unfold in front of you. But the very fact that you are on foot and you are engaging with these animals on their terms, in their environment, with nothing separating you from them, makes it an experience that is like no other, particularly with respect to a big cat.
It is just the most wonderful experience. I couldn't.
You've done it recently, Chris, as well, haven't you?
Yeah. Did it earlier on this year. It was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. One of the best things I've done. At our Festival of Wildlife, we have a formidable team of experts, and I don't count myself amongst the experts. I count myself as one of the organisers. So Norman Carr once said to me that an expert was someone who knew more and more about less and less until he knew everything about nothing. So I'm not going to be in that category. Though actually, I'll never get that far. Anyway, Jonathan Truss, as I mentioned, obviously Mark Coordine, who many of you know, Nick, of course, who is with me now, other Nick Mackman, and Dan, who is the manager of our wildlife team and a tremendous naturalist, and has recently come back from South Georgia himself, actually, having had an absolutely superb trip too. I think that's really almost concludes our evening. But we have a few questions that have been posed to us. I'll put information on costs there of the trip. I'm sure that if you would like more information about the trip, we would of course be very, very happy to get that to you. And one or two people have indeed asked us questions already. Please feel free to make use of the chat facility and also the Q&A. But just to answer one or two very specific questions, in terms of the what lens I was using for the close-ups of the penguins, you're not allowed to be any closer than 5 meters away from the penguins, and I was using the Canon 100 to 500 mil RF lens, which is a really super lens, but that's what I was using for most of the imagery that I took. For the landscape stuff, I was using 24 to 105. A couple of people have asked about clothing. Clothing, obviously, the very best clothing to use, or the very best way of dealing with the cold and the weather on these trips is to make use of layers, to layer up. On our Festival of Wildlife trip, there is Paul, thank you for your question. I'll answer that in a second. Yeah, you've completely put me off my stride. That's quite funny. Layering is good. There is no clothing actually provided for the Festival of Wildlife trip. If you were to visit South Georgia and the Falkland Islands on other trips, depending on the vessel that you're traveling on, sometimes clothing is indeed provided, but that is generally speaking only a jacket. But good Gore-Tex clothing is good. Gore-Tex, of course, is good from the point of view of waterproofing and so on and so forth. But we can provide you with more information about that. Paul, you said one more trip in your lifetime, South Luangwa or South Georgia. Well, of course, there is only one answer to that. And my trip would have to include both locations. I would fly from London to Johannesburg up to the Luangwa Valley at the end of October, and then fly from Johannesburg across to Buenos Aires or Santiago, and then down to the Falklands to board a vessel to go across to South Georgia. I'm sure it's all possible. Single supplements. It is possible to have a single supplement. Single supplements aren't cheap. There's no denying it. The information about that is in our documentation. But if my memory serves me correctly, I think the single supplement is about 1.7 times the cost of a cabin, of a twin cabin. Couple of people have asked about. Yes, it was a cheap, Paul. You're quite right. Couple of people have asked about muck boots and footwear, whether they are included. There will be boots on all of these trips. Boots are loaned to you, so they will be available in the cabin. You would provide us with your boot size and your you provide us with your boot size, and the boots will be made available to you in your cabin. Let's have a look. Someone else has asked about COVID policy. Well, that will very much depend on when you are traveling and which vessel you are traveling on. But I think I should like to think that COVID will no longer be an issue when we come to our Festival of Wildlife in October 2025. Nick, is there anything else we need to say? Do you think we've covered it all?
I think we've covered it all. There are always lots more more detailed questions we could delve into, I suspect, but in terms of giving a flavour of what a trip to South Georgia entails, is like, and the experiences that it would bring, I think we've done very well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. There is one other question that I didn't answer, for which I apologise. Somebody's asked whether the situation in respect of life jackets. Yes, of course, life jackets are mandatory or PFDs, personal flow station devices, are mandatory in Zodiacs. And generally speaking, when you get onto land, you would take your PFD off, and that will be looked after by the expedition crew until such time as you are ready to reboard the Zodiac. I'm very conscious of everybody's time. I am very conscious of the fact that it is now nearly 20 to 9, and you have been listening to myself and Nick for over an hour. We are enormously grateful to you for taking the time to spend your evening with us. And if you would like us to answer any more detailed questions, or you would like to speak to me personally about the trip that I've just done, as I say, I got back from South Georgia and the Falklands only yesterday, you'd be very, very welcome to email me, and I'll be happy to have a chat. So without further ado, I shall bid you all a fond farewell, and thanks once again for joining us.
Good evening, everyone.
And that's that. We will see you again, I hope, another time.
Cheerio. Good night, folks.
Cheerio.